My name is Morgan, and at 32 years old, I thought I had finally found my happily ever after with James. Growing up with a single mum who worked 3 jobs to put me through college, I fought hard to earn my law degree and build a successful career. James and his family welcomed me with open arms, or so I thought. What I never expected was that on our wedding day, my mother-in-law Barbara would make a demand that would change everything. Before I tell you how my perfect wedding turned into a nightmare, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever dealt with impossible in-laws. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. I always believed that hard work would get me anywhere I wanted to go in life. That philosophy served me well through law school and into my career at Donaldson Wright and Associates, Kaya, where I quickly gained a reputation as a fierce corporate attorney who never backed down from a challenge. My colleagues often joked that I could negotiate a deal with the devil and still come out ahead, but none of my legal training prepared me for negotiating with Barbara, my mother-in-law. I met James at a charity gala 3 years ago. I was there representing my firm more focused on networking than socializing when I literally bumped into him at the bar, spilling my champagne all over his expensive suit. Instead of being upset, he laughed and said, "Well, that's one way to break the ice." His warm brown eyes and genuine smile immediately put me at ease. James worked as a financial analyst at a prestigious investment firm. Where I was pragmatic and detail-oriented, he was creative and spontaneous. He balanced my tendency to overthink everything with his ability to live in the moment. After that first meeting, we became inseparable. Our relationship progressed naturally, each milestone feeling right in a way I'd never experienced before. 6 months into dating, James invited me to meet his family. "They're going to love you," he assured me, squeezing my hand as we pulled up to his parents' suburban mansion. I remember feeling intimidated by the manicured lawn and marble columns so different from the modest apartment where I grew up. Barbara greeted me with a hug that felt warm enough, though her eyes scanned me from head to toe in quick assessment. She was impeccably dressed in designer clothes, her blonde hair styled perfectly, not a strand out of place. "James has told us so much about you," she said, leading us into their formal living room, where Richard James's father waited with their daughter Tanya. Richard seemed kind but reserved, letting Barbara lead the conversation. Tanya James's younger sister was friendly and asked genuine questions about my work and background. The dinner went well enough, though I noticed Barbara's slight change in expression when I mentioned my single mother and scholarship to law school. "How most resourceful," she commented with a tight smile. In our family, education has always been a priority across generations. I brushed it off as awkwardness, not wanting to read too much into a first meeting. James seemed oblivious to the undercurrent beaming at me across the table. As the evening progressed, Barbara showed more of her passive-aggressive tendencies. She'd compliment my dress, then immediately add that it was so practical or sensible. She asked about my career, but interrupted my answers to reminisce about friends whose daughters had left prestigious careers to focus on family. On the drive home, I mentioned some of her comments to James. He sighed and said, "Mum can be a bit traditional, but she means well. She'll warm up once she gets to know you better." Despite these early warning signs, I was too in love with James to worry much about his mother. When he proposed during our weekend trip to a mountain resort a year later, I said yes without hesitation. The ring had been his grandmother's, a beautiful antique that James had secretly had resized for me. "My mother insisted I give you this ring," he said as he slipped it on my finger. "It's been passed down for generations." I was touched by the gesture, seeing it as Barbara's way of welcoming me into the family. How wrong I was. The wedding planning began almost immediately. Barbara called the day after our engagement, insisting on being involved in every decision. At first, her enthusiasm seemed sweet, if a bit overwhelming, but soon she was scheduling appointments with venues and vendors, without consulting me, always choosing the most expensive options. "The Wilsons have been members of the country club for decades," she would say when I suggested a more affordable venue. "What would people think if we hosted the wedding somewhere else?" I tried to maintain boundaries while keeping the peace. I'd agree to her venue, but insist on choosing the flowers myself. I'd let her add business associates to the guest list, but draw the line at inviting her entire tennis club. My own mother Susan watched this dynamic with growing concern. During one of our weekly lunch dates, she gently said, "Morgan, honey, are you sure you're okay with how much control Barbara is taking over your wedding?" "It's fine, Mum," I assured her. "She's just excited, and it makes James happy to see us getting along." Susan gave me a look I recognized from my childhood, the one that said she knew I wasn't being completely honest with myself. Just remember, it's your wedding, sweetheart, yours and James's. As the months passed, the tension with Barbara escalated. She began criticizing my choices more openly, from the simplistic design of our invitations to the casual menu I preferred. Each criticism came with a reminder of how the Wilson family had always done things, their long-standing traditions, their reputation in the community. James assured me that everything would settle down after the wedding. Once we're married, she'll have to accept that we make our own decisions. He promised, kissing my forehead. Just a few more months, and then it's just you and me. I held on to that promise through the increasingly difficult planning process, never imagining how dramatically things would fall apart on what should have been the happiest day of my life. As the wedding date approached, Barbara's interference became increasingly unbearable. What had started as suggestions quickly transformed into demands, each one chipping away at the vision James and I had for our wedding day. I tried to be understanding. After all, she was James's mother and clearly wanted the best for her son, but her version of the best seemed to completely disregard my input. 3 months before the wedding, Barbara scheduled an appointment at an exclusive bridal salon without telling me. I arrived to find not only her waiting, but also 5 of her friends, women I'd met briefly at engagement parties who now sat expectantly with champagne flutes in hand. "Surprise, Barbara exclaimed, air-kissing my cheeks. "I thought you could use some expert opinions on your dress. These ladies have attended more society weddings than anyone in town." I forced a smile while inwardly seething. I had already chosen my dress weeks ago with my mother and best friend Zoe. It was elegant but simple, not the elaborate ball gown I suspected Barbara had in mind. "Actually, Barbara, I've already found my dress," I said as gently as possible. Her smile faltered for a moment before returning tighter than before. "Well, surely you wouldn't mind trying a few options. Marianne here is personal friends with the designer, and she's arranged for some exclusive pieces not even in the catalogue yet." The next 2 hours were excruciating as I was stuffed into dress after dress, each more extravagant than the last, while Barbara and her friends critiqued every aspect of my appearance. The lace disguises those athletic shoulders of hers. Thank goodness they can take in the waist considerably. When I finally escaped and called James in frustration, his response left me cold. "Mom's just trying to help Morgan. She's done this before with Tanya's wedding. Can't you just humour her a little?" That night we had our first serious fight as a couple. I felt unsupported and disrespected, while James couldn't understand why I was making such a big deal over his mother's involvement. "She's been dreaming about my wedding day since I was born," he argued. "It's not her wedding day, James. It's ours." Or at least I thought it was. I counted, tears of frustration welling in my eyes. We eventually made up with James, promising to speak to his mother about boundaries. Whether that conversation ever happened, I don't know. What I do know is that Barbara's behaviour only escalated. She began insisting on incorporating traditional elements that held no meaning for me. There was the family Bible that must be carried down the aisle, the specific scripture readings that had been used in Wilson weddings for generations, the ceremonial candles that must be lit in a particular order. "But we're not even having a religious ceremony," I protested during one planning session. "The Wilsons have always had proper church weddings," Barbara replied as though I hadn't spoken. "The Reverend is already booked." When I looked to James for support, he shrugged helplessly. "It means a lot to Mom and Dad," he whispered. Then I discovered Barbara had changed several of our vendor contracts behind my back. The modern string quartet we'd hired was replaced with a traditional organist. The farm-to-table caterer we'd selected was switched for the country club's standard menu. The photographer known for candid journalistic shots was swapped for one who specialised in rigid formal portraits. Each change came with the same explanation from Barbara. "This is how things are done in our family." And from James, "Is it really worth fighting about?" The night before our wedding, the tension came to a head at the rehearsal dinner. Barbara had taken over the planning, completely hosting it at the country club with a guest list that seemed to include everyone but my friends and family. My mother sat at a far table looking uncomfortable among strangers, while Barbara held court at the main table. During her toast, Barbara raised her glass and said, "Tomorrow, Morgan will finally become a Wilson. We welcome her and hope she will uphold the values and traditions that make our family what it is." Her smile never reached her eyes as she added, "Though it's quite an adjustment coming from such different backgrounds." The undercurrent was clear to everyone in the room. I was an outsider, not quite good enough for the precious Wilson name. Later that evening, as guests mingled during dessert, Barbara pulled me aside to a quiet corner of the terrace. "We need to have a mother-daughter talk," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, but her grip on my arm surprisingly firm. "There's a tradition in the Wilson family that I haven't mentioned yet," she continued once we were alone. "When someone marries into our family, there's a contribution expected from the bride's family. A gesture of good faith, you might say." I looked at her blankly. "What kind of contribution?" "Financial, of course. The standard amount these days is $150,000. I nearly choked on my champagne. "Excuse me. It's quite reasonable, considering what the Wilson name brings to the marriage. Connection, status, opportunity." She waved her hand dismissively. "Usually the bride's father handles this discreetly, but since your situation is non-traditional, I thought I should speak with you directly." I was speechless, my mind racing. Was this some sort of bizarre joke? A test? "My mother can't afford anything close to that amount," I finally managed to say. "And even if she could, this is the first I'm hearing of any such tradition." Barbara's smile tightened. "Well, you're a successful attorney, aren't you? Surely you have savings, or you could take out a loan. Consider it an investment in your future." I excused myself quickly, claiming I needed to check on my mother, but in reality I needed space to process this outrageous demand. That night I barely slept, tossing and turning as I considered my options. Should I confront James, postpone the wedding? Was this Barbara's way of trying to scare me off? By morning I had convinced myself that Barbara had been testing me, pushing to see how far I would bend to her will. I decided to proceed with the wedding, believing that once James and I were officially married, we could set proper boundaries with his mother. I had no idea that the worst was yet to come. The morning of my wedding day dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight streaming through the windows of the bridal suite at the country club. Despite the tension with Barbara, I felt a surge of excitement. In just a few hours, James and I would be husband and wife, beginning our life together. My mother helped me into my dress, the one I'd chosen myself, despite Barbara's disapproval. It was elegant ivory silk with delicate lace, detailing simple but sophisticated. As Mum fastened the last button, she squeezed my shoulders gently. "You look absolutely beautiful, honey," she said, her eyes misty. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become." Zoe, my maid of honor, arranged my veil while chattering excitedly about the perfect weather and how handsome James had looked during the rehearsal. For a moment, everything felt right. This was my day, and not even Barbara could take that away from me. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Walking down the aisle and seeing James waiting for me, his eyes filled with love and wonder washed away all my concerns. We exchanged vows. We had written ourselves promises of partnership and respect that moved many guests to tears. When the Reverend pronounced us husband and wife, James's kiss felt like a seal on everything we had pledged to each other. As we walked back down the aisle together, I caught sight of Barbara in the front row. Her smile seemed frozen, her applause mechanical. Still, I was determined not to let her affect my happiness. The reception began joyfully enough. James and I entered to enthusiastic applause, and the initial toasts from the best man and Zoe were heartfelt and funny. The first course was being served when I noticed Barbara's increasingly cold behavior toward my family and friends. She barely acknowledged my mother when they crossed paths and seemed to be whispering critically about my college roommates who had traveled from across the country to be there. Then came our first dance as husband and wife. James held me close as we swayed to our song, his whispered, "I love you," making me feel like we were the only two people in the room, until Barbara interrupted, tapping James insistently on the shoulder. "I need to speak with you, darling. Just for a moment," she said, already pulling him away from me. I watched as they spoke in a corner, Barbara's expression intense, James's growing increasingly uncomfortable. When he returned to me, his face was pale. "What was that about?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Nothing important," he said unconvincingly. "Just some issue with the catering." Before I could press further, Barbara was approaching us again, this time with a formal-looking document in her manicured hands. Richard trailed behind her, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Now that you're officially a Wilson," Barbara said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "we need to finalize the financial arrangements we discussed." My stomach dropped. She couldn't possibly be doing this here now, but she was. Barbara thrust the document toward me. It was a formal agreement, clearly drawn up by a lawyer, stipulating that I would pay $150,000 to the Wilson Family Trust as a condition of marriage into the family. "As I explained yesterday, this is standard procedure for our family," Barbara continued, her voice carrying to surrounding tables. a sign of commitment and respect for the Wilson legacy. Guests were starting to stare. I felt a hot flush of embarrassment and anger rising to my face. There is nothing standard about demanding payment for marriage, I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. I will not be signing this. Barbara's eyes narrowed. Perhaps you don't understand the significance of joining our family. The Wilson name opens doors that would otherwise remain closed to someone of your background. James finally spoke up, though not in the way I had hoped. Morgan, maybe we should discuss this privately. Mother feels quite strongly about upholding family traditions. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was he actually considering his mother's outrageous demand? There's nothing to discuss, James. Oh, I said firmly. I will not pay for the privilege of being your wife. Barbara's face hardened into a mask of contempt. Well then, it seems you're not family material after all. She turned to the nearest guests. I apologize for this unfortunate scene. It appears there's been a misunderstanding about what it means to become a Wilson. Richard finally stepped forward. Barbara, perhaps this isn't the time or place, he began, but his weak protest trailed off under his wife's glare. James, Barbara snapped, you need to decide right now where your loyalties lie, with your family and our traditions or with her. James looked torn, glancing between his mother and me. Morgan, please, can we just talk about this? Maybe there's a compromise. I felt as though I'd been slapped. A compromise on paying your mother to marry you? Are you serious right now? Barbara seized on James's hesitation. I think it's clear she doesn't respect our family or our traditions. This wedding is a mistake. She raised her voice, addressing the now silent reception. I must regretfully inform you that without fulfilling the traditional family obligations, this union cannot be recognized by the Wilson family. Murmurs spread through the crowd. My mother stood up from her table, ready to come to my defense, but I subtly shook my head. This humiliation was already too public. James, I said quietly, tell your mother she's out of line. He ran a hand through his hair, visibly distressed. Can we please just step outside and talk about this? Before I could respond, Barbara gripped my arm. I think you should leave. This is a family celebration, and you have made it abundantly clear that you refuse to become part of this family. I stared at her in disbelief. You're throwing me out of my own wedding. It was never your wedding, she hissed. It was a Wilson wedding, and you've proven yourself unworthy of the name. The room spun around me. Guests were watching in shocked silence, camera phones discreetly recording what would undoubtedly become social media fodder by morning. In my beautiful wedding dress, surrounded by flowers and candles and all the trappings of what should have been the happiest day of my life, I had never felt more humiliated. I looked at James one last time, silently begging him to stand up for me, for us. But he just stood there, frozen between his mother and me, unable or unwilling to make a choice. With as much dignity as I could muster, I turned and walked out of the reception hall, the weight of 100 stunned stares on my back as the heavy doors closed behind me. I found myself outside on the country club's manicured lawn, the autumn air biting through the thin silk of my wedding dress. Tears blurred the fairy lights strung through the trees into watery stars. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? Just an hour ago, I had been dancing with James as his wife, feeling like my life was finally complete. Now I stood alone, publicly humiliated, and apparently no longer married in the eyes of the Wilson family. I considered calling a ride and simply disappearing. The thought of facing anyone after that scene was almost unbearable. But where would I go? Back to the hotel room booked for our wedding night, to my apartment, now half empty, with boxes packed for our planned move to James's condo. As I stood there shivering, both from cold and shock, I heard the door open behind me. For a moment my heart leapt, thinking it might be James. Instead, I saw my mother and Zoe hurrying toward me, concern etched on their faces. Morgan, sweetheart, Mum said, draping her shawl over my shoulders. Are you okay? I couldn't even form words, just shook my head as a sob escaped. I cannot believe what just happened in there. Zoe fumed, her bridesmaid dress swishing as she paced in front of me. Who does that woman think she is? Demanding money, throwing you out. This isn't the Middle Ages. James just stood there. I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't defend me. Tlanshitinain. Mum squeezed my hand. Men can be blind when it comes to their mothers, honey, especially ones as domineering as Barbara. What am I supposed to do now? I asked, feeling utterly lost. Zoe stopped pacing and looked me directly in the eyes. Morgan, listened to me. You're not just any bride who got pushed around. You're Morgan Andrews, corporate attorney extraordinaire. You don't back down from bullies in the boardroom, so why would you back down from one in a designer dress? Her words cut through my fog of humiliation and self-pity. She was right. In my professional life, I never allowed myself to be intimidated or manipulated. I fought for my clients fiercely and strategically. Why was I standing outside in the cold instead of defending myself in my marriage? You're right, I said, straightening my shoulders. This isn't over. That's my girl, Mum said with a proud smile. As we plotted our next move, I remembered something critical. While Barbara might have emotional power over James, I had something she apparently hadn't considered: legal knowledge. If she wanted to play hardball with contracts and family obligations, she was challenging the wrong attorney. I pulled out my phone and called Nathan, a colleague from my firm who specialized in family law. Despite it being a Saturday evening, he answered on the third ring. Nathan, it's Morgan. I need your help. I know you're probably busy, but this is an emergency. After briefly explaining the situation, Nathan didn't hesitate. Text me the address. I'll be there in 20 minutes with everything you need. With a plan forming, I squared my shoulders and headed back toward the reception hall. Mum and Zoe flanked me like bodyguards. When we re-entered, the atmosphere was tense and awkward. Some guests were leaving, others clustered in small groups whispering. Barbara stood with Richard and several older couples, probably country club friends, gesturing dramatically as she undoubtedly cast herself as the victim of my defiance. James spotted me immediately and broke away from a conversation with his visibly uncomfortable best man. He approached cautiously, his expression a mix of regret and confusion. Morgan, thank God you came back. I'm so sorry about what happened. Mum shouldn't have done that. No, she shouldn't have, I agreed coolly. But what's more concerning is that you didn't stop her. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I usually found endearing. Now it just seemed like another sign of weakness. I was caught off guard. You know how Mum gets when she's set on something. This isn't about your mother being difficult, James. This is about her trying to control our marriage from day one, and you letting her. That's not fair, he protested. I love you, Morgan. I married you today because I want to spend my life with you. Then act like it, I challenged. Your mother just told everyone our marriage isn't valid because I refused to pay a fee. She threw me out of our wedding. What are you going to do about it? He glanced over at Barbara, who was watching us intently from across the room. I'll talk to her. Maybe we can work out a compromise. The amount is negotiable, I'm sure. I felt my heart crack a little. You still think this is reasonable, that I should pay your family to marry you? It's not like that, he said weakly. It's tradition. All the Wilson brides have contributed something. Something, James. A family heirloom, a meaningful gift, not a six-figure check. During this exchange, I was strategically scanning the room, assessing potential allies. I noticed James's sister Tanya looking at her mother with obvious disapproval. Several of James's cousins appeared embarrassed by the situation. Even Richard seemed deeply uncomfortable with his wife's behavior. I wasn't just gathering emotional support. I was building a case. In the hour I estimated it would take Nathan to arrive, I needed to understand exactly who stood where in this family drama. Who might support us if James and I presented a united front against Barbara's manipulation? I moved through the reception, having brief strategic conversations with key wedding guests. James trailed behind me, alternating between apologizing and suggesting we just give his mother what she wanted to salvage the day. She'll calm down once it's done, he insisted. Then we can enjoy the rest of our reception and go on our honeymoon as planned. I will not start our marriage by giving in to emotional blackmail, I said firmly. If you want this to work, you need to decide right now, are you my husband or are you Barbara's son? It was a test one I desperately hoped he would pass. But as I watched him struggle with the question, I realized that regardless of his answer, I needed to stand up for myself, even if that meant standing alone. The tension in the reception hall was palpable, as everyone waited to see how this uncomfortable drama would unfold. Conversations happened in hushed tones, with frequent glances toward Barbara, who maintained her position of righteous indignation, and toward me as I moved purposefully around the room. James hovered nearby, clearly torn between his mother's expectations and his new wife's dignity. At precisely 7:30, Nathan arrived. I spotted him at the entrance, legal briefcase in hand, scanning the room for me. I waved him over, relief washing through me at the sight of his confident professional demeanor. If Barbara wanted to play with contracts and financial demands, she was about to meet her match. "Thank you for coming," I said as he reached me. "No colleague of mine is getting shaken down at her own wedding," Nathan replied, his voice low but determined. I brought the documents we discussed, plus a few extras I thought might be useful. We conferred briefly in a quiet corner, Nathan laying out various papers and explaining their implications. James watched nervously from a few feet away, clearly wondering what we were plotting. Once our strategy was clear, I approached the DJ's table and asked for the microphone. The music faded and all eyes turned to me as I took center stage. "I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate what should be the happiest day of our lives." I began, my voice steady and professional. "Unfortunately, there's been a situation that needs to be addressed before we can continue." Barbara started to move forward, but Richard placed a restraining hand on her arm. Good. At least someone in the Wilson family had some sense of propriety. Many of you witnessed Mrs. Wilson's unusual demand earlier. For those who didn't, she presented me with a document requiring me to pay $150,000 to join the Wilson family. I paused, letting the absurdity of the demand sink in. She claimed this was a family tradition that all Wilson brides have honored. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw several of the older Wilson relatives exchanging confused glances. As an attorney, I take contracts and traditions very seriously, so I asked my colleague Nathan Lewis, who specializes in family law, to help me investigate this claim. I gestured to Nathan, who stepped forward with his professional smile firmly in place. After reviewing available records and consulting with several long-standing members of the Wilson family, I continued, "We've discovered that no such tradition exists. No previous bride has been required to make such a payment." Barbara's face flushed with anger. "How dare you question our family practices? You know nothing about us." "Actually, Barbara," came a voice from the side of the room. It was Mrs. Sullivan, Richard's aunt, an elderly but sharp-eyed woman I'd met at the engagement party. "I've been a part of this family for 60 years, and I've never heard of such a tradition. When I married Richard's uncle, there was certainly no financial demand made of my family." Several other relatives murmured in agreement, looking at Barbara with new suspicion. Nathan stepped forward, opening his briefcase on a nearby table. "Additionally, I've brought the prenuptial agreement that James and Morgan signed 3 months ago, which was reviewed and approved by both parties' attorneys." He held up the document. "This comprehensive agreement already outlines all financial arrangements between the couple and specifically states that no additional financial obligations exist or can be imposed by either family." Barbara's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She clearly hadn't expected legal pushback. "Furthermore," I added, producing another document Nathan had prepared, "I've drafted a new legal agreement that clearly establishes boundaries for family interference in our marriage. This document, which I invite James to sign, protects both of us from any future attempts at financial or emotional manipulation." James stepped forward hesitantly, looking at the paper with wide eyes. This was his moment of decision. Barbara must have sensed it too, because she surged forward. "James Wilson, don't you dare sign anything that woman puts in front of you. I am your mother, and I know what's best for this family." Then something unexpected happened. Richard, who had remained largely silent throughout the wedding planning and today's drama, finally spoke up. "Enough, Barbara." His quiet voice somehow carried across the room. "This has gone too far." Barbara whirled on him. "What are you talking about? I'm protecting our family name." "No, you're trying to control our son the way you control everything else." Richard's voice gained strength. "You've done this before, driving away anyone who threatened your influence. Remember Linda?" James looked confused. "Linda, Dad? Who's Linda?" Richard sighed heavily. "Linda was your brother's fiancée." "I don't have a brother," James said slowly. "Not anymore," Richard agreed sadly. After Barbara forced Linda out with similar tactics, Thomas cut ties with the family completely. He lives in Seattle now. We haven't spoken in 15 years. The revelation landed like a bomb in the reception hall. I watched James's face as he processed this information, his expression shifting from confusion to shock to something approaching clarity. Tanya stepped forward next. "It's true, James. I was only 12 when it happened, but I remember Thomas. Mom did the same thing to his fiancée and then to my college boyfriend when I brought him home for Christmas 4 years ago. That's why I broke up with him. I was afraid of being cut off like Thomas was." Barbara's carefully constructed facade was crumbling. "This is ridiculous. I was protecting you from gold diggers and social climbers." "Morgan is a successful attorney," Tanya shot back. "She doesn't need our money. She loves James for who he is, not for the Wilson name." James was looking between his father, sister, and mother, years of family dynamics suddenly being reframed before his eyes. Then he turned to me. "What does that document say?" he asked quietly. "It simply states that decisions in our marriage will be made by us alone, that no financial demands can be made by either family as a condition of our relationship, and that we agree to maintain healthy boundaries with both of our families." I held it out to him. "It protects us, James, both of us." Barbara made one last desperate play. "James, if you sign that paper, you're choosing her over your family, over me. Is that what you want? To turn your back on everything we've given you?" It was the moment of truth. Everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath as James stood between his mother and me, a physical representation of the choice before him. He looked at Barbara, his expression sad but resolute. "Mum, I love you. You'll always be my mother. But Morgan is my wife now. My family is with her." He took the pen Nathan offered and signed the document without further hesitation. Barbara's face contorted with fury. "This is unacceptable. Richard, do something." But Richard shook his head. "No, Barbara. This ends now. We've already lost one son to your controlling behaviour. I won't lose another." "Fine," Barbara spat. "If you choose her, don't expect another penny from us. Your position at your father's firm, your trust fund, all of it gone." "Actually," Nathan interjected smoothly, as James's legal counsel just reminded me, James's trust fund was established by his grandfather with specific provisions that it cannot be revoked by his parents under any circumstances, and his employment contract at the firm is with the board of directors, not with Mr. Wilson personally. Barbara looked like she might explode. "This is intolerable. I will not stand here and be humiliated in front of all our friends." "Then perhaps you should leave," I suggested calmly, "because James and I are staying to celebrate our wedding with people who truly support our marriage." With a final glare of pure hatred, Barbara grabbed her purse and stormed toward the exit. "Richard." "We're leaving." Richard hesitated, looking at his son with regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry, James, for everything." Then he followed his wife out though, with much less dramatic flair. As the doors closed behind them, an awkward silence fell over the reception. Guests exchanged uncertain glances, waiting to see what would happen next. The perfect Wilson wedding had devolved into a family therapy session, and no one seemed to know the appropriate social response. For a moment after Barbara and Richard's departure, the reception hall remained frozen in uncomfortable silence. Guests shifted awkwardly, unsure whether to leave or stay, whether this was still a wedding celebration, or if it had transformed into something else entirely. James stood beside me, looking both relieved and devastated, the weight of his family's secret suddenly visible on his shoulders. I squeezed his hand and stepped forward, addressing our guests with as much warmth as I could muster after the emotional roller coaster we'd just experienced. "Well," I said with a small laugh, "I don't think that was in the traditional wedding timeline." A ripple of nervous laughter broke the tension. "But James and I are still married, still in love, and still very much want to celebrate with all of you. So if the DJ wouldn't mind restarting the music, and if the bar is still open, I think we could all use a drink." The DJ immediately launched into an upbeat song, and the bartenders who had been watching the drama unfold like everyone else snapped back to attention. Slowly, the reception began to regain some semblance of normalcy. People returned to their tables, conversations resumed, and a few brave souls even ventured onto the dance floor. James pulled me into a quiet corner, his eyes searching mine. "Morgan, I am so sorry. I had no idea Mum would go that far, and I should have stood up to her immediately." "Yes, you should have," I agreed, not quite ready to let him off the hook entirely. "James, we need to talk about what just happened about your brother. I never knew existed, and about how we're going to move forward from here." He nodded solemnly. "I know. I should have told you about Thomas, but honestly, my parents never talked about him. It was like he stopped existing when he left. I was only 15 when it happened. I knew he and Mum had a huge fight about his fiancée, and then he was gone. Dad said he moved away for work, and eventually we just stopped mentioning him." "That's incredibly sad," I said, my heart aching for the family fracture James had grown up with. "And it explains a lot about why you've been so hesitant to stand up to your mother. You saw what happened when someone did." "I was afraid of losing my family," he admitted. "But today I realized I was about to lose you, and that was so much worse." He took both my hands in his. "I promise you, Morgan, from this day forward, we are a team. You and me against the world, including my mother." It was what I needed to hear, but I knew that actions would speak louder than words in the days to come. We'll need to set clear boundaries, I said, and you'll need to enforce them consistently even when it's difficult. I will, he vowed. Starting right now, our marriage comes first. As we rejoined the reception, I was moved to see how many guests had chosen to stay. My colleagues from the law firm were clustered around Nathan, probably getting all the legal details of what had transpired. My college roommates had taken charge of distributing champagne. Even some of James's relatives, including Tanya and Aunt Sullivan, were mingling and making a visible effort to save the celebration. My mother approached us, her expression a mix of concern and pride. "Are you two okay?" "We will be," I assured her, leaning into James's side. Mum nodded, then turned to address the room, tapping a knife against her champagne flute to gather attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," she announced when the room quieted. When Morgan was 10 years old, she came home crying because some girls at school had been cruel to her. I told her something then that I've repeated many times throughout her life. True strength isn't about never falling down. It's about how you get back up. She smiled at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Today I watched my daughter face humiliation and heartbreak on what should have been the happiest day of her life. But instead of crumbling, she stood tall. She fought for her marriage with the same fierce intelligence and dignity that makes her such an exceptional person. She raised her glass higher. To Morgan and James, may your life together be filled with love, respect, and the courage to stand up for each other even when it's hard. To Morgan and James, echoed throughout the room. As the evening progressed, Tanya sought us out, pulling James into a tight hug before turning to me. "I should have warned you," she said apologetically. "I knew Mum was difficult with James's girlfriends, but I never imagined she'd pull something like this." "It's not your fault," I assured her. "Actually, there's something you should know." Tanya continued, glancing around to make sure her mother hadn't somehow returned. "Mum's been planning this for months. I overheard her on the phone with her friend Margaret, talking about how she needed to test you before you officially joined the family." "Test me?" I repeated incredulously. Tanya nodded grimly. "She does this, creates impossible situations to see if people will bend to her will. With Thomas's fiancé, it was demanding she convert to our religion before the wedding. With my boyfriend, it was insisting he change his career plans to join Dad's firm." James looked stunned. "I had no idea it was so calculated." "She's careful to hide it from you," Tanya explained. "She knows you want to see the best in her." This information was both disturbing and oddly validating. Barbara's behaviour hadn't been a wedding day impulse, but a premeditated strategy to establish control over our marriage from the beginning. As the reception wound down, James and I decided to proceed with our honeymoon as planned. We needed time away, just the two of us, to process everything that had happened and to begin building our life together without immediate family interference. But as we prepared to leave for the airport the next morning, we received multiple missed calls from Richard. Apparently, Barbara had organised an emergency family meeting for Sunday afternoon, demanding everyone's presence to address yesterday's unfortunate events. James looked at me, uncertainty in his eyes. Should we go? I thought about it carefully. Running away would only postpone the inevitable confrontation. If we were going to set boundaries with Barbara, better to do it immediately and decisively. Yes, I decided, but on our terms. And we bring Nathan as our legal representative. Up-till. James nodded, a new resolve in his expression. We face this together. As we prepared for this meeting, I felt oddly calm. Barbara had tried to humiliate me, to buy compliance with threats and manipulation. Instead, she had inadvertently forced James to see the truth about her behaviour and had strengthened our commitment to protecting our marriage. Whatever happened at this family meeting, we would face it as a united front. 1 year later, I stood in our kitchen arranging flowers for our first anniversary dinner. So much had changed since that dramatic wedding day that sometimes it felt like it had happened to different people entirely. The family meeting Barbara had called the day after our wedding turned out to be surprisingly anticlimactic. We arrived with Nathan in tow, prepared for another confrontation, only to find a subdued Barbara sitting with Richard in their formal living room. Tanya was there too, silent support in the corner. Before Barbara could launch into whatever speech she had prepared, Richard spoke up. "Barbara has something to say to you both." My mother-in-law looked physically pained, but she managed to say, "I behaved inappropriately at your wedding. I apologise." The words were stiff, clearly rehearsed, and lacking in genuine remorse. But they were a start. Later, Richard pulled James aside and explained that he had given Barbara an ultimatum after they left the wedding get therapy for her controlling behavior, or he would begin divorce proceedings. After 15 years of enabling her and losing one son in the process, he had finally found his backbone. "I should have done this years ago," he admitted to James. Maybe Thomas would still be part of our lives. In the months that followed, we maintained careful boundaries with Barbara. Sunday dinners were a minefield at first, with Barbara oscillating between cold silence and passive-aggressive comments. But James remained firm, walking out more than once when his mother crossed the line. "We'll try again next week," he would say calmly as we left. "But only if you can respect my wife and our marriage." Slowly, painfully, Barbara began to change. The therapy sessions Richard had insisted upon seemed to be having an effect, though I doubted she was being fully honest with her therapist. Still, she made efforts, probably motivated more by fear of losing her remaining children than by genuine personal growth. But I would take progress wherever it came from. Meanwhile, James and I focused on building our life together. The foundation of our relationship had been tested in fire on our wedding day, and we emerged stronger for it. James took a new job at a competing firm, stepping out from under his father's professional shadow. I was promoted to partner at my law firm, partly due to the reputation I'd gained for handling difficult negotiations with grace under pressure. And in a surprising turn of events, James managed to reconnect with his estranged brother Thomas. It began with a simple Facebook message: "I think I finally understand why you left." After months of cautious exchanges, Thomas agreed to meet James for coffee during a business trip to Seattle. Their reunion was emotional but healing. Thomas had built a good life on the West Coast, with a successful tech career and a family of his own, including Linda, the woman he had chosen over his mother's approval all those years ago. They had 3 children that James had never met, nieces and nephews, who knew nothing about their Wilson relatives. "Maybe someday we can all be family again," James told me after returning from that first visit. "But Thomas needs time, and so do I." As I set the table for our anniversary dinner, I reflected on the lessons of our tumultuous first year of marriage. I had learned that standing my ground didn't mean burning bridges, that family dynamics were complex, but not immutable, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set firm boundaries. James arrived home with a bottle of champagne and a small wrapped package. "Happy anniversary to the strongest woman I know," he said, kissing me softly. "And to the man who proved he could grow and change," I replied, accepting both the kiss and the gift. Inside the package was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a miniature scales of justice. "To remind you that you fought for the balance in our marriage," James explained, "and won." Over dinner, we talked about the future we were building together, plans for a family of our own, someday career aspirations, dreams of travel. None of our discussions involved seeking Barbara's approval or accommodating Wilson family traditions. "I heard from Thomas yesterday," James mentioned as we shared dessert. "He's considering bringing the family for Christmas this year." "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. "The healing of that family wound would be good for everyone, especially James." "He says he wants to meet the woman who finally stood up to Barbara and lived to tell the tale," James added with a smile. I laughed. "Well, I had good motivation. You were worth fighting for." And that was the truth. Standing on that country club lawn in my wedding dress, humiliated and hurt, I could have walked away. But something in me knew that what James and I had was worth fighting for, and that giving in to Barbara's manipulation would poison our marriage from the beginning. By refusing to pay the price Barbara had set on her son, I had actually saved our relationship. By establishing boundaries early and decisively, we had created space for our marriage to grow on its own terms. As we raised our glasses in a toast to our first year together, I thought about all the new brides watching this video who might be dealing with their own difficult in-laws. "Here's my advice to anyone facing family interference in their relationship," I said to the imaginary audience. "Stand your ground with dignity. Remember that your marriage belongs to you and your partner, not to your extended family. Set boundaries early and enforce them consistently. And most importantly, face these challenges as a united team." Have you ever dealt with difficult in-laws trying to control your relationship? Share your stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you handled it and what advice you might have for others in similar situations. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more true stories about overcoming family challenges, and share with anyone who might need to hear that it's okay to stand up for your relationship. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, no one gets to put a price tag on love.